She was just 15, walking home through the snowy forest trails of northern Colorado when she saw it. Something tiny trembling under a bush. At first, she thought it was a kitten, but as she moved closer, her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't any house pet. It was a bobcat, abandoned, injured, and barely breathing. What happened next left even the wildlife rangers speechless and changed her life forever. You don't choose to be a savior. You just answer when the silence begs you to act. The wind knifed through the pines with a fierce hiss, stripping loose snow from the branches and flinging it into the gray sky like powdered glass. Winter had wrapped Estes Park, Colorado, in a merciless grip. Everything, trees, trails, the winding creek, was frozen beneath layers of silence and ice. Out here, in the remote edge of Roosevelt National Forest, even time seemed to move slower, weighed down by the cold. Lena Whitaker, 15 and fiercely independent, tugged her scarf tighter around her face as she trudged through the woods alone. It was the first week of February, and school had closed after a snowstorm dumped over a foot of powder the night before. While others stayed in, sipping cocoa and binging movies, Lena had gone out, like always. The woods weren't just a place to explore. They were a refuge, a place where she didn't feel like she was too weird, too quiet, too much of a loner. The trees didn't ask her to talk. They just let her be. She followed the narrow trail that wound along the frozen edge of Shadow Creek, the air sharp and still. Her boots crunched softly in the snow. Icicles dangled from the low branches like silver teeth. The sun, hidden behind thick clouds, gave the landscape a strange bluish tint, turning every shadow into a question mark. Lena liked that, the mystery of it all. A sudden gust of wind blew past her ears, and then something stopped her. A sound, faint like a hiccup or a whimper. She froze, holding her breath. Then it came again. A soft, stuttering cry, barely audible, yet full of pain. Her eyes scanned the woods, trying to pinpoint the direction. The sound didn't match anything familiar. Not a squirrel, not a bird. It was something smaller, weaker. Lena stepped off the path and into the deeper snow, her boots sinking to her shins. She pushed through the bare underbrush, heart pounding now. Her hands, buried in fingerless gloves, trembled. Not from cold, but from a rising anticipation she couldn't explain. 30 feet off trail, near the base of a snow-dusted juniper bush, she saw it. At first, she thought it was a clump of fur. Brown, curled tight, half covered by wind-blown snow. Then it moved. Just a twitch, a shiver. She crouched low, slowly reaching out to part the brush. There, huddled beneath the lowest branches, lay a tiny creature, barely the size of a football. Its fur was patchy with frost, pale brown with small, black spots. Its ears had dark tufts. Its muzzle twitched as it took in a trembling breath. And when it opened its eyes, they were piercing blue. A bobcat kitten, Lena's breath caught. She had only seen one this close in books, maybe once at the Raptor Center on a field trip. But never like this. Never so raw, so fragile. Its back leg was twisted, clearly broken. Its ribs showed through its thin coat. It looked exhausted, as if it had screamed all the strength out of itself just to survive the night. Lena's heart clenched. She knew what her father would say. Leave it. Call wildlife services. Don't interfere. Let nature decide. But she also knew what nature would decide. It would take the kitten in the next few hours. The snow, the cold, the injury. It was a death sentence out here. She looked down into its eyes and whispered without thinking, "No, not today." She shrugged off her coat, the cold slamming into her like a wall, and gently, carefully, lifted the kitten from the snow. It didn't hiss, didn't claw. It barely moved. It just let out a weak sound, half a breath, half a cry, and slumped into the warmth of her coat. Lena wrapped it tight and pressed it against her chest. Her own heartbeat was rapid, pulsing against the animal's fragile body. She turned back toward the trail, forcing her legs to move through the deep snow. Her house wasn't far, just under a mile, but every step felt like dragging her body through concrete. The cold tore at her exposed arms. Her cheeks burned. Still, she didn't stop. Didn't even slow down. Once, she slipped and fell to her knees, but she didn't let go of the bundle. Didn't let snow touch it again. She pulled it tighter to her, whispering, "I've got you. Just hold on." By the time the woods thinned and her house came into view, modest, two-story, with her dad's old canoe stacked along the garage wall, her legs were shaking. She rounded to the back and slipped through the side door, praying her father wasn't home yet. The garage was cold, but not nearly as cruel as outside. She set the bundle of coat and kitten onto a thick pile of old horse blankets and ran to plug in a portable space heater. Warmth buzzed to life. Then she crouched beside the animal again and gently opened the coat. The kitten lay still, breathing fast but shallow. Its eyes fluttered open. They met hers. And something passed between them. Not trust, not yet. But not fear either. Lena exhaled. "You're safe now," she whispered. And for the first time in her life, she felt it too. The choice that could change everything. Sometimes, saving a life means risking your own peace. The garage smelled of motor oil and dust, but to Lena, it suddenly felt like a sanctuary. The heater buzzed softly, throwing out warm air into the cold space, as she sat cross-legged on the concrete floor beside the motionless bundle. She gently unwrapped her coat, revealing the tiny bobcat curled within, like a fallen ember, struggling to stay lit. Its breathing was shallow and fast, each inhale a whisper. The leg, twisted awkwardly beneath its body, was swelling now. It was hard to look at. Lena felt her stomach knot. She had brought home a wounded wild animal. Not a cat, not a dog, a bobcat. And even though it was just a kitten now, it would grow into something fierce, something dangerous. She bit her lip, heart racing as the truth hit her like a shovel to the chest. What if Dad finds out? He was strict when it came to rules about wildlife. Raised on ranger ethics, he believed humans should observe but never interfere. No matter how brutal nature got, he loved his daughter. But even more, he respected the line between the wild and the world they lived in. And Lena, she had just erased it. She sat there, staring at the bobcat's closed eyes, trying to make her next move. Calling animal control would mean handing the kitten over, and the chances of it surviving transport in this state were slim. If it bit someone, they'd put it down. She knew how the system worked. Or she could try to help it herself. It was risky, maybe even stupid, but it was alive, and that meant there was a chance. Lena stood up quickly, brushing snow off her pants, and turned to the old wooden shelves along the garage wall. They were filled with gear, camping supplies, fishing tackle, and, more importantly, the emergency vet kit. She pulled it down, heart hammering as she fumbled through gauze pads, antiseptic, syringes still in sealed bags. Most of it was labeled for dogs, horses, livestock, nothing for wild cats. Still, she grabbed a small plastic thermometer and a thermal blanket from the top shelf. She turned back and knelt beside the kitten, hands trembling as she slid the thermometer under its front leg. She waited. "Come on, please." When the little screen beeped, her stomach dropped. 93.1 degrees Fahrenheit. Way too low. Lena didn't panic. She moved automatically, layered the blankets, angled the heater closer, then placed her coat over the kitten again, like an extra skin. She reached for her phone and Googled everything she could. How to save hypothermic kitten. How to warm up baby bobcat. Wild animal home care. The answers varied. The risks were high. But one thing was clear: heat, fluids, time. She whispered to the kitten, "You're not dying today. Not while I'm here." She poured a bit of warm water into a small lid and offered it gently, holding her breath as the kitten's nose twitched. Nothing. Then a flick of its tongue, one lap, then another. It wasn't much, but it was something. Lena sat back and exhaled. She felt like crying and cheering at the same time. Over the next hour, she stayed close, barely blinking. She watched the color start to return to the pads of its paws. Its tiny claws twitched once or twice, and then it opened its eyes. This time, more alert. Still foggy, still afraid, but awake. "Hi," Lena said softly, smiling through her worry. "I'm Lena. You don't know me, but I think we're about to be important to each other." She couldn't leave it in the garage all night. The temperature would drop, and she didn't trust the heater alone. So, Lena tiptoed into the house and grabbed an old laundry basket, lined it with towels, and added a soft hoodie she never wore anymore. Then, she carried the bobcat into her room. She placed the basket beside her bed, barely breathing as she made sure it was warm and secure. The kitten shifted once, its breathing slower now, steady. For the first time that day, Lena allowed herself to relax. She sat down beside the basket and just watched it sleep. Its body curled tightly, like a question mark. So small, so quiet, and so far from where it was supposed to be. That night, she didn't sleep much. She kept waking up to check on it. Each time, her eyes landed on its tiny chest, watching for the rise and fall that meant it was still here, still fighting. And every time she saw it, something in her heart grew stronger. She wasn't just trying to save a life. She was taking responsibility for it. And that changed everything. The next morning, Lena was up before the sun. She quietly moved through the kitchen, pouring warm goat's milk into a bottle she'd kept from when she used to foster kittens through a rescue. It had been years, but she remembered the basics. Small amounts, careful timing, no force. She warmed the milk, added a drop of honey for energy, and knelt beside the sleeping kitten. She nudged it gently. Its eyes opened, slowly, cautiously. Lena held the bottle to its mouth. After a moment of hesitation, it latched. A few tiny gulps, weak but deliberate. Tears stung Lena's eyes. "You're not just some animal," she whispered. "You're a survivor." The rest of the morning passed in quiet panic. She cleaned up the garage, erased footprints from the snow, and scanned the road for her father's truck. He wouldn't be back until late evening. That gave her time. Time to learn, time to plan, and time to build something she hadn't expected at all: a connection. One that ignored the laws of wild and human, predator and prey. A connection that asked no questions and demanded no promises. Just trust. It was fragile, but it was real. And it all began with a choice. A choice she hadn't even known she was making. But one that had already changed her. Forever, a secret bond begins. The wild may fear the human hand, but kindness, true, unspoken kindness, can teach it to trust. Lena never meant to keep the bobcat a secret for this long. At first, it was survival, hers and the kitten's. But now, every heartbeat, every quiet moment between them, made the silence feel more like a promise. She named him Brink. The name came to her that second morning as she watched him try to stand. He wobbled, nearly fell, then locked his paws in place and lifted his chin ever so slightly. He looked like a creature who had clawed his way back from the edge, from the very brink, and he stayed on her mind every second after. Lena transformed her room into a makeshift sanctuary. She cleared the floor, rolled out an old yoga mat, and placed Brink's basket in the sunniest corner near the window. She borrowed an infrared lamp from the garage and hung it above him, checking the temperature constantly. Her desk became a wildlife station. Books, notes, internet tabs left open to pages titled Rehabilitating Wild Felines, Homemade Electrolyte Solution, and Bobcat Kitten Behavior. Feeding time became sacred. Brink was still weak, but every day he ate a little more. Sometimes she'd mix goat's milk with a dash of raw egg yolk, or blend softened kitten food into a warm slurry. She fed him with a small syringe at first, then graduated to a baby bottle. The first time he mewed after finishing, soft and sharp like a chirp, Lena nearly cried. He was learning to trust her, and she was changing. Gone were the long after-school hours spent sketching birds in the park. She skipped video calls with her one close friend, Zoe. She stopped answering her dad's occasional check-in texts when he was at the ranger station. Every part of her life narrowed to a single heartbeat: Brink's. But it wasn't just caretaking. Lena started documenting everything. She drew Brink in every stage: sleeping, limping, stretching beneath the heat lamp. She recorded short videos on her phone, whispering observations. Day 4. He followed the sound of my voice today. Day 6. He batted a string for the first time. She didn't share them with anyone. Not yet. They were hers. Theirs. Brink's leg was still tender, and she feared it hadn't set right. But he was no longer lifeless. He'd gone from trembling and cold to alert and curious. He now tracked movement with his eyes, perked up when she entered the room, and, more than once, licked her fingertip after a feeding. It wasn't affection, not in the way a dog might offer it. It was tolerance, recognition, maybe even understanding. She learned to read him. His tail flicks meant overstimulation. The little grunts he made when sleeping, comfort. The flinch in his left ear, too loud. In turn, he learned her rhythms. Her voice calmed him. Her footsteps didn't scare him. And her presence became a familiar thing. Some nights, she lay on her stomach beside the basket, sketching as he slept. She'd watch his tiny chest rise and fall, and imagine what it might have felt like to leave him there in the woods. To walk away. She knew then that she'd never really had a choice. Saving Brink was the most natural thing she'd ever done. But there was a cost. Every day, the lie grew heavier. She kept her bedroom door locked. She stuffed towels at the base of the door to muffle any sound. She cleaned obsessively, making sure no fur got tracked out of the room. And when her dad was home, which wasn't often, she barely breathed when he walked past her door. The closest call came on the 8th day. She had just finished feeding Brink and was wiping down his face when her dad called out from the kitchen. "Lena, you home?" She froze. Brink shifted, startled by the voice. He let out a low, raspy hiss. Lena shot across the room and pulled the comforter over his basket, whispering frantically, "Shh, baby. It's okay. He's just a sound. He's just noise." She shoved the milk bottle under her bed, wiped her hands on her jeans, and flung her door open with a too-wide smile. "Hey, Dad," she said, voice a little too high. He looked at her, narrowing his eyes. "You okay?" "Yeah, just, studying. Bio project." He nodded, unconvinced but didn't press. "Dinner's in the fridge. I'm heading back out for the night. Big cat tracks near Ridge Trail." Her stomach twisted. "Big cat?" "Bobcat. Brink's mother, a sibling." She nodded quickly. "Be safe." As he walked out the door, Lena exhaled in a long rush, then slipped back into her room, heart pounding. Brink had poked his head out from the basket, blinking slowly. She sat beside him and whispered, "We're okay. I've got you. I won't let them take you." That night, he curled up not in the basket, but beside her hand, tucked near her hip. It was the first time he had sought her warmth, not just tolerated it, and in that tiny gesture, something bloomed between them. Not ownership, not domestication, but trust, born in shadows, fed in silence, held together by something neither of them fully understood. The wild had stepped inside, and for the first time, it wasn't afraid. Neither was she. The truth comes out. Secrets grow like fire, warm at first, but dangerous when they spread. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of Thursday that starts like any other, quiet, cautious, and slightly tense. Lena had grown good at hiding the signs. Each morning, she woke up early to clean Brink's bedding, refresh the water, check his temperature, and hide every trace before her dad stirred in the next room. By now, it had been over 2 weeks. Brink was no longer that limp, frozen creature she found in the snow. His coat had thickened and fluffed out, a beautiful mix of pale, tawny brown and black rosettes that shimmered under her lamplight. The leg still looked stiff, but he was walking, more like stalking, around her room with an elegant, low-shouldered gait. He was growing, fast. And the bigger he got, the louder the risk whispered behind every corner. That Thursday morning, Lena thought she had everything under control, until she heard the garage door creak open. Her dad had come home early. "Lena," his voice echoed through the kitchen. "You left your phone in the truck." Panic gripped her chest. She had just opened the door to her room to grab a fresh towel. Brink, curious and bolder than ever, trotted into the hallway behind her, silent as shadow. Lena froze, but her dad didn't. He turned the corner, phone in one hand, and saw it. The Bobcat, right there. Not in a photo, not a guess, real. Brink stood still, ears alert, tail low. Not aggressive, but not tame either. There was a heartbeat of silence. Then Lena stepped forward, gently placing herself between the animal and her father. "Dad, wait!" "Is that what I think it is?" he said, voice low and tight. She nodded. "I can explain." He didn't yell, didn't step forward, but his expression, disbelief, worry, anger, something deeper, was worse than shouting. "How long has that animal been in this house?" 17 days, she said quietly. He let out a harsh breath and ran a hand through his graying hair. "You're telling me you've been living with a wild bobcat for over 2 weeks?" "I saved him," she said quickly. "He would have died." "He was freezing, Dad. He couldn't even move." "That's not the point, Lena," he snapped. "You know how this works. You don't keep wild animals, not ever. You call it in. You report it. You do not bring it home." She flinched, but stood her ground. "I knew what would happen if I reported him. They'd take him away. He wouldn't have made it through the night." He opened his mouth, then shut it. Anger was giving way to something else, fear. "This isn't a puppy, it's a predator. One day it's a kitten, the next, it's 30 pounds of teeth and instinct." "But he trusts me," Lena whispered. "He knows I'm not going to hurt him. He's never once tried to bite me." Her dad shook his head, pacing now. "You think that matters? Lena, you could be charged. You could be hurt. This could go wrong in 100 ways." Tears welled in her eyes. "I know all of that, but I couldn't just let him die." He stopped, looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. The kind of sigh that came from deep disappointment, and something else, resignation. "I should report this," he said. "I know," she said. "But will you just look at him first?" Hesitantly, he did. Brink, now crouched behind the coffee table, peeked out. His ears twitched, but he didn't run. He didn't growl. Lena stepped closer and held out her hand. Brink patted over, nuzzled her fingers, then sat quietly beside her. The look on her dad's face softened, just a little. "You named it?" "Him. His name's Brink." Another pause. Then he whispered, "Of course it is." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "We can't keep him." "I know," Lena said, voice cracking. But we don't have to lose him yet, right? He exhaled again, slower this time. I'm calling Parks and Wildlife, he said. But I'm doing it my way, quietly. Maybe, maybe there's a place for him. Somewhere that'll give him a chance. Lena's heart squeezed tight, but she nodded. It was more than she hoped for. It was a small, fragile yes. Later that night, after Brink had curled up in the basket again, her dad knocked gently on the door. He handed her a folded slip of paper, a name, an address, Netherland Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. They're expecting you Saturday, he said. Lena looked at him, not angry anymore, not afraid, just sad and proud. You did the wrong thing, he said, but you did it for the right reasons. That night, she lay beside Brink with her hand resting near his paw. She whispered, "We've still got a few days." And Brink, half asleep, let out the softest, rasping purr. The truth was out, but the story wasn't over. A wild soul doesn't forget. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means loving wide enough to let something become what it was meant to be. The drive to the Netherland Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was quiet. Too quiet. Lena sat in the passenger seat of her dad's old Chevy, her arms folded tightly over her chest, but her hand kept twitching, reaching, out of habit, for the small crate on the seat behind her. Brink was curled up inside, silent. He hadn't hissed or cried the entire ride, but Lena could feel his energy shifting, nervous, alert, like he knew something was coming, like he sensed change in the air. The trees thinned as they climbed toward the center, the pine forest giving way to open sky and a winding road dusted with frost. Lena stared out the window, blinking fast. She hadn't cried, not since the moment her dad told her they had to do this. She couldn't afford to, not in front of Brink. He needed her strong. So she stayed steady, even when every mile felt like pulling a piece of her heart out of her chest. They arrived mid-morning. The building was simple. Low wooden siding, small porch, and a bright green sign reading Wildlife Rehabilitation, entry by appointment only. A woman in her 30s, wearing a fleece vest and work boots, met them at the door. "Lena Whitaker?" she asked kindly. "That's me," Lena said, stepping out and trying not to shake. "I'm Mara," the woman said. "We spoke on the phone. You must be the one who saved the bobcat." Her voice was warm but measured. Professional. Lena nodded. "His name's Brink." Mara crouched beside the crate and peered in through the bars. "Well, Brink," she murmured, "you're lucky to have someone who fought this hard for you." Inside, Brink didn't growl or retreat. He just stared back, calm, distant, but not afraid. "Let's get him settled," Mara said gently. They led Lena and her dad into the intake room. Clean metal tables, scales, quiet lighting. Brink was lifted carefully, examined, scanned. Mara spoke with steady reassurance. "He's underweight but alert. Good hydration. That leg, yes. It healed a little off, but he's walking on it, which is what matters." Lena stood off to the side, hugging her elbows and barely breathing. Mara turned to her. "You did a good job. He's made it this far because of you. That's not something we see every day." Lena swallowed hard. "So, what happens now?" Mara smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes too. "He'll be placed in a rehab enclosure with as little human interaction as possible. We'll work on reinforcing his natural instincts. If he responds well, avoids handlers, learns to hunt, reverts, we'll schedule him for release in spring." "And if he doesn't?" Lena whispered. Mara hesitated, then said softly, "Then we'll figure out a sanctuary placement. But from what I see, he's still wild, deep down." Lena stepped closer to Brink's crate, crouching so she was eye level with him one last time. He met her gaze, still, watching. And when she reached a hand toward the mesh grate, He lifted his nose, just slightly, and touched it to her fingers. No sound, no mew, just a single soft gesture. Her throat tightened. She leaned close. "I don't want to say goodbye," she whispered, "but I will, because I want you to be free, more than I want you to be mine." Brink blinked slowly. She stood up, blinking hard. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. Pride, sadness, respect. Mara spoke gently. "Would you like updates? We can send you progress reports. Pictures." Lena shook her head. "Number, I think he needs to forget me to survive out there. But thank you." They left quietly. Lena didn't look back until the truck turned the bend and the rehab center disappeared behind the trees. She stared out the window the whole way home. That night, her room felt empty, wider, colder, but she didn't fill the silence. She let it sit. She lay awake, long past midnight, imagining the sounds Brink might be hearing now. Branches, wind, birds. Maybe he'd sleep tonight, warm in straw, under a safer roof. Maybe he'd dream of snow. Maybe he'd remember her voice, even just a little. She turned onto her side and whispered to the quiet, "Goodbye, Brink." The bobcat was gone, but something deep inside her had changed. Because a wild soul may forget the name it once heard whispered, but it never forgets the warmth that carried it back from the edge. And neither would she. A release and a goodbye. Or so she thought. When love is real, it doesn't vanish with distance. It returns when it matters most. Spring came late to the Rockies that year. Snow clung stubbornly to the higher trails, and Lena had almost stopped watching the mail. It had been 3 months since she left Brink at the rehabilitation center. 3 long, aching months. She hadn't asked for updates. She couldn't. She told herself it was better that way, cleaner. No blurred lines, no temptation to visit. If he was going to become wild again, truly wild, he needed to forget her. But on the last day of May, a letter arrived. No return address. Just her name, handwritten in neat blue ink. Inside was a short note. He made it. Strong, confident, no fear of humans. "We released him this morning, just beyond the outer ridge of Roosevelt National. He turned back once, just once, then vanished into the trees." "Mara." Lena read it 3 times, then once more, aloud. Each time, her hands shook a little less. He made it. She pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Brink was free. Summer deepened and life moved on. Sort of. Lena went back to sketching birds, walking trails, visiting the small rescue center on weekends. She even started sharing the story with her best friend Zoe. Well, most of it. She didn't mention the part where a wild animal had once slept beside her. Some things were too precious to explain. One day in late August, the weather changed again. A storm was moving in, and dark clouds sat heavy over Shadow Creek. Lena grabbed her sketchpad and jacket and headed out anyway. She needed the quiet. She hadn't been back to the spot where she found Brink, not since that frozen day in February. Now, as the wind curled around her ankles and the air turned sharp again, she stepped off the trail and down the narrow slope toward the old juniper bush. It hadn't changed. Still hunched low, its roots tangled in the rocks near the creek. She crouched beside it, tracing her fingers along the bark, remembering the way he'd looked that day. Barely breathing, barely there. She sat on the ground, pulled out her sketchpad and began to draw. Not birds this time, not the trees, but him, Brink, standing tall, alive, free. She didn't notice the sound at first. A soft shuffle, a low rustle behind her. She froze, slowly turned. At the edge of the trees, maybe 20 feet away, something moved. Silent, smooth. A shadow with spots. Her heart slammed into her ribs. It couldn't be. It couldn't. But there he was, Brink. Larger now, stronger. His coat gleamed in the silver-gray light, muscles rippling beneath it. His eyes, those same ice-blue eyes, locked onto hers. Neither of them moved. Then, with a slow and deliberate grace, he stepped forward. One paw, then another. He stopped just short of her reach. Lena didn't breathe, didn't dare. Brink tilted his head slightly. Then, just once, he lowered it. Not submission, not fear. Recognition. A wild soul acknowledging a moment. A memory. A bond not broken by time, distance, or instinct. Lena whispered, her voice caught in her throat. "Hi, boy." Brink blinked slowly, then turned. He didn't run. He walked. Back into the trees. Back into the world that was always meant for him. But he paused at the edge, looked back, just once, then disappeared. Lena sat there shaking, overwhelmed by the kind of silence that only follows something sacred. He remembered. After everything, he remembered. And in that moment, every ache, every tear, every doubt vanished. Because it had never really been a goodbye. Just see you when it matters most. 1 year later, the forest gives back. What you give to the wild, it remembers. And when the time is right, it returns it in ways you never expect. The mountain air was warmer than usual for early spring. Snow still clung to the north faces of the higher ridges, but down by Shadow Creek the earth had begun to breathe again. Wildflowers pushed their way through last year's frost, and the creek, once frozen and silent, now gurgled with life. Lena stood at the edge of the clearing, the familiar scent of pine and thawing soil wrapping around her like a forgotten embrace. A full year had passed since that February morning, since she found Brink trembling beneath this very bush. She came alone again. No camera, no sketchbook, just her hands tucked into her jacket pockets and a small stone in her palm. Smooth, oval, painted with a soft blue paw print. It was a gift she'd made the night before, unsure why until this moment. A way to say thank you, maybe, to him, to this place, to everything it had changed. Lena had changed too. She'd spent the last 12 months volunteering weekly at the Wildlife Center in Nederland, where Mara had offered her a part-time role helping with orphaned fawns, birds, and injured raccoons. She'd started writing about her experience, even shared her story at a school assembly. The headline in the school newsletter read, "Local teen rescues wild bobcat and learns what it means to let go." But what no one knew, what she hadn't told a soul, was that she'd returned to this spot once a month since last summer. Not expecting him, not even hoping, really. Just being there. Because this place held a piece of her heart. Today, it felt different, charged, as if the air itself was remembering. She crouched near the juniper bush, gently placed the painted stone beneath it, and whispered, "You saved me too, Brink. I think you always did." Then she stood, brushing her hands on her jeans and preparing to head back down the trail. But before she took a step, something made her stop. A sharp sound, not threatening, just sudden. The unmistakable crack of a branch underfoot. Her head whipped around. At first, she saw only trees, the shimmer of moving leaves. Then, movement. Out of the brush, silent as fog, stepped a bobcat. Larger now, striking, his coat sleek and healthy, his shoulders broad with strength, eyes piercing and unmistakably blue. Brink. Lena's heart caught in her throat. He was magnificent, but more than that, he was wild, truly, fully. And yet he didn't run. He stood still, watching her, nostrils flaring, ears flicked forward. No collar, no tag, only instinct and memory. He took one step forward, then another. Closed half the distance between them. close enough for her to feel that old warmth, like the heartbeat she once listened for every night. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just let him come to her on his terms. Brink paused, lowered his head in a familiar tilt. Then he sat, calm, proud, like a king returning to his throne. Lena knelt slowly, her hand resting lightly on the ground. "I didn't expect you," she whispered. He blinked slowly. Then, after a few breaths of stillness, he stood, turned, and walked away. Not quickly, not urgently, but with purpose, with peace. As he disappeared into the trees, Lena felt something release inside her. Not sadness, not longing, but completion. The kind you only feel when a chapter ends exactly the way it was meant to. She stayed a while longer, letting the quiet settle, letting the moment soak in. Then she stood, looked one last time at the paw-print stone beneath the bush, and smiled. Brink had survived. He had become what he was always meant to be, and somehow, in the process, so had she. As Lena walked back through the forest, a gentle wind rose behind her, rustling the trees, like the forest itself was whispering goodbye. Or maybe, just maybe thank you, full circle, when the wild and human hearts meet. Some stories don't end, they echo, across seasons, across species, across the space between what is wild and what is human. It was dusk when Lena returned home, the sky awash in lavender and gold. The kind of evening that didn't ask for noise or music, just breath and stillness. She walked into the house, dropped her jacket on the hook by the door, and stood in the quiet for a long moment. So much had changed since that first snowy day 1 year ago. Yet somehow, it still felt like the beginning of something. Dinner was already on the table, her dad's doing. He'd gotten quieter, gentler over the last year. Less the stoic ranger, more the father who understood how a girl could fall in love with a wild thing. They ate in a kind of unspoken peace, exchanging stories from the day. Hers about the wildlife center, his about tracking elk populations. After they finished, Lena wandered out to the porch with a mug of tea and sat on the wooden steps. The stars were beginning to show, slowly, like shy freckles across the darkening sky. She tilted her head back and listened. The forest was humming, alive with the music of the evening. Crickets, owls, wind whispering through trees. And beneath it all, something deeper. Not a sound, but a feeling that somewhere out there, Brink was still walking those woods, still breathing that same air, still remembering. Not just her, maybe, but the warmth, the trust, the moment when two paths, human and wild, had briefly become one. She reached for her phone and opened the recording app. Her fingers hovered for a moment before she hit record. Then, in a steady voice, she spoke. "To the one who taught me that saving something wild doesn't mean caging it. It means believing in its freedom more than your fear." She paused, smiled. "Brink, I hope you're hunting strong. I hope you remember the softness, even if the wild needs your sharpness now. You were never mine to keep, but you'll always be a part of who I am." She hit stop and saved it. Not to post, not to share, just to keep. Like a bookmark in a story she would never finish. The next morning, she headed to the wildlife center as usual. Mara greeted her at the back gate, holding a clipboard and looking unusually energized. "Morning, Forest Whisperer," she joked. "You have a minute?" Lena smiled. "Sure, what's up?" "We're thinking of starting an outreach program," Mara said. "Educational, for local schools, to teach kids about respecting wildlife, about rehabilitation and release and, well, stories like yours." Lena blinked. "You want me to help?" "We want you to lead it," Mara said. "You're not just the girl who rescued a bobcat. You're the girl who let him go." Lena looked past her, out to the enclosures, where a fox kit was wrestling with a stuffed rabbit, and a young hawk sat perched beside a handler. She felt something shift inside her. A full circle. Not just a story, a purpose. She nodded. Okay, let's do it. That afternoon, she began outlining the program, lesson ideas, photos she'd drawn, gentle language for kids too young to grasp the harder parts. And at the top of every page, she wrote the same words. The wild doesn't need to be tamed to be loved. By the end of the week, the first class had signed up to visit. Lena stood in front of 23rd graders, her hands a little sweaty, her heart pounding. But when she told them the story of Brink, his broken leg, his fierce eyes, the way he chose the woods again, they didn't fidget or whisper. They listened, wide-eyed, spellbound. One boy raised his hand and asked, "Did he come back to say thank you?" Lena smiled. "No," she said softly, "but I think he never had to." That night, Lena returned once more to the juniper bush by the creek. This time, she brought a photo she'd drawn, a full sketch of Brink at his strongest. She tucked it beneath the stone with the paw print and whispered one last thing. "Run far, wild soul, run free. You'll always have a home in my heart." As she walked away, the wind picked up again, stirring the leaves. The forest rustled behind her. And in that sacred space where wild and human hearts had once met, peace remained, full circle. Sometimes, life gives us a fragile moment, a heartbeat on the brink of being forgotten. What we choose to do in that moment defines more than the outcome for someone else. It defines who we are. Lena's journey with Brink teaches us a powerful truth. Compassion doesn't always roar, it often whispers. It shows up when no one is watching, when the easy choice is to walk away, and the brave choice is to kneel beside something scared, broken, and wild. In your own life, you might not come face to face with a bobcat, but you will meet moments that ask the same question. Will you protect what's vulnerable, even if it's inconvenient? Will you give something or someone the chance to grow free, even if it means letting go? At Paw Prints and Stories, we believe that the smallest actions can leave the deepest imprints. If stories like this move you, challenge you, or remind you of the wild goodness in this world, join us. Let's keep telling stories that matter. And here's your challenge. The next time you see something fragile, don't turn away. Lean in, listen, and ask yourself, what would love do here?